Hi guys, it's Gordon, fascinated by fungi. I'm here to interview Mario Gabiati, who is a prolific Bay Area educator, mycophile, foodie. He does all sorts of stuff. Mario, I met him years ago, and I have just been fascinated by him ever since, sort of following from afar and eventually establishing a friendship. And I'm really excited to bring him on today to just kind of talk to you guys about all the different projects he has going on, what life has been like during quarantine. He's recently become a dad, so maybe we'll get into that stuff. But yeah, Mario's a super charming, amazing guy. You guys are going to love him. He's got a great website, Mario Gabiati. You can check out all the stuff we're going to talk about. But let me see if I can get him on the line here, and we'll get to it. But again, sort of the format how I do these live things is I'll keep an eye on the chat, but I'm usually not going to respond to a lot of the questions because I'm trying to have kind of a high-level conversation with the person that I'm interviewing. And near the end, maybe we'll get a chance to hop into some of the questions. But if not, feel free to leave questions on the video afterwards, and we will answer them to the best of our ability. So I'm going to invite. We will get chatting. So it's just connecting. Also, fingers crossed, last couple times I've done this, I've hit Instagram delete the video. So hopefully that won't happen this time because it's super frustrating. But, it's technology and this is what we're dealing with. So I can see that Mario is on.
Right.
It's connecting. There he is. Hey, man.
I think we got this figured out.
Yeah, we almost do.
No. Technology.
Yeah, dude. So, hi. How you doing?
I am doing well. Just chilling in the Mycelial Mass lab here.
I
with
noticed
some of our...
I noticed a hood behind you. So
yeah, we have
in the lab.
Yeah, right before quarantine, we installed a 6-foot training hood so that we could have 2 students on either side, which of course we're not doing now. But it also gives us just room to do like as many different kinds of experiments, and we have a program. I mean, like if you're going to work in a room, even if you do have coronavirus, this would be a pretty safe room to work in.
Yeah, I was going to say, is that a laminar flow hood, or is it pushing out or pushing air in?
This is a biosafety cabinet, so it's pushing air out, but it filters the air inside this room probably once every, I don't know, 6 minutes or something.
Yeah, not bad.
So all through HEPA, so there's very little particulate or anything in there when you're running the hood. So
that's good stuff, dude. So I was trying to tell people encompassing everything that you do is difficult because you are a man of many talents, many trades. You've worn a lot of hats over the years, and I guess I think the important thing to me is really I'm going to always ask people a little bit about your history with mushrooms, because I think this is a myco-centric account, and we can hop into some of the other things because I know there's lots and lots of stuff we could talk about. And I'm not going to ask you, what's your favorite or what inspired you, any of that stuff, because those answers always end up being so much more complicated. But did you have like a singular crystallizing like fungi moment that really captured you and made you want to like teach people about mushrooms or really just get into it and learn more yourself?
So it's actually, it's sort of interesting. I kind of ended up in the mushroom thing by accident. And there were some interesting seeds that were planted a long time ago that now I can recognize grew into something. But at the time they were when I grew up learning biology, people were telling us that mushrooms were basically plants.
Plants, yeah. Up until about the 70s, they were considered plants, and a lot of teachers didn't even recognize the difference for a long time.
Yeah, and they got very little attention, and there wasn't much known about them, and there was this kind of, we don't know very much, so therefore it must be very uninteresting.
Yeah, can't be that important,
Which is weird, and so when I went to grad school, I went to Scripps Institution of Oceanography for a degree in conservation science, and got to work with some pretty cool researchers that work down there. One of them was, what's his name, Dayton. And anyway, he's like 100 years old and has been doing, he got famous originally for doing the zone of death around these plants where you see like foraging in natural environments. All the little grazing creatures will only graze a certain distance from their cover from predators. And so there's all these really interesting biodiversity effects that happen based on fear dynamics with being predated on. And that provides a ton of extra boundaries in biological place that wouldn't normally be there physically. So all of those little barriers create opportunities for biodiversity and blah, blah, blah. So anyway, we would go on these long trips with these famous geologists and ecologists that had done all this work. And then in order to kind of force us to absorb and relearn how to readmit the material, they broke down a lot of sections and kind of handed people stuff like, okay, you're going to teach the class on caliche, which is like, rock layer that forms when you have very little rainfall over a long period of time. Or, you're going to do plants and you're going to do fungus or whatever. And I got the fungus one. And, being a bit of like an overachiever, I kind of like got super sucked into it. And I was like, wow, there's like a lot more here. And I remember at the time, like Paul Dayton, who's the famous guy, like started kind of like expounding on mushrooms. And I was like, hey, this is my section. You're supposed to let me teach it. And so like, that was the first time I'd ever done any serious, like, reading into what mushrooms were biologically. And I was also kind of like invested in a bunch of marine science projects at the time, so it wasn't like I was ever going to go directly towards fungus from there. But then a few years later, a girl I was dating who's like a chef had given me a book. It's called Mycophilia, written by Eugenia Boone.
Yeah, that's a really
good writing and a good story. And at the time, I was kind of looking around. I just moved back from France, and I had like moved over there for a relationship, but I'd been doing oyster research and stuff, and I had like a community, and then I came back, and I was like, I wasn't planning on coming back, so I hadn't like built anything to come back to, and I was really looking for groups to connect with. And the book was like, hey, you should do some mushroom stuff because they have a bunch of groups that are fun to connect with. And so I started connecting
there, right? Yeah.
And it was amazing. Like there is a really huge mycology community, and it touches on so many different things. It touches on, the hardcore science part of it, of course. But now all of a sudden it's like microbiology because you can do DNA sequencing, and that's like relatively affordable. You can cook them and eat them. So there's this whole culinary angle. You can turn them into materials. You can grow them at home. They become pets. I mean, there's like health issues.
Yeah. You can
right? You can use it as a supplement. Exactly, right.
On and on and on.
So it just seems like, both from the standpoint that they've been somewhat ignored, so there's room for you to make new discoveries and just, have new experiences that are exciting. Yeah. Even, we're doing a dye class this next coming weekend, and, people have been doing plant dyes for a really long time. So when you get along to the part where you're doing, like mushroom dyes and stuff, it seems really novel, even though everything about it is exactly the same, and all the same rules that you learned when you were doing your plant dyes apply pretty directly. But it feels new and special, and it becomes a conversational topic. So just like your Jello molds of the 1950s, I think fungus is going to be our kind of like conversational topic now. And I think that there's a lot to mine here. It's kind of like when we discovered the microbiological world, and we're like, wow, there's like funguses, and so we're still digging in that heap, and we'll be digging in there with mycology for a long time. But I don't know if mushrooms will always have the celebrity status that they have like right now.
Yeah, they're certainly having a moment, and I think it's nice to be on this sort of leading edge and getting to be out in front of it a little bit, and that's something we've invested in and we've been thinking about. You've been teaching about mushrooms for a while, and it's interesting to hear too that I also had sort of a not entirely marine bio, but I did a lot of scuba in undergrad, and so I was very focused on small things in the ocean and ecological webs there. And coming back to mycology, coming back to mushrooms, when I had planted some seeds as a kid, but kind of forgot about it for 10, 20 years sort of, came back and realized that some of the stuff that I learned from marine biology was very applicable in terms of the way that systems worked and things interacted in the forest, and helped me, again, key into details, because I've been floating around underwater looking for tiny little nudibranchs, and here I am floating around in the woods looking for mushrooms. And
I think that's one of my favorite things about, I think it was the Colbert show, so Stephen Colbert went over to the Middle East and did like a USO show, and he had the like interior minister for Iraq at the time on as an interviewee, and he got a marine biology degree, and he's like, "You're running an interior program of a landlocked country. What are you talking? How is this applicable at all?" And he had the best response I've ever heard. It was, like the study of oceanography, and it's all just systems in flux, because there's nothing that's happening in the ocean that's not being affected by the thing that's right next to it, or the thing that just happened before it.
Connected, yeah.
And when you spend a lot of time underwater, it's such a new environment when you first get down there and you start scuba diving around. But if you go to the same spot, I mean, we were like doing benthic surveys, the Chevron plant for 2 years, and I mean, like, it's like a forest that I go to all the time. You start seeing these patterns, and really the environments aren't all that different. There's density issues. There's the mechanics are a little bit different from that standpoint, but
a little more vertical.
The fluid dynamics that work in the ocean are the same fluid dynamics that work when we're on land. They're just happening with air and all that swirling around and all that. It's just a big whirlpool in the sky, and that's a hurricane, right? So I think spending time in these other environments and getting to know, I mean, like, that's the cool thing about mycology to some extent, is you're not chasing after something. You're not working with something that's hard to access. I mean, it's really, you can walk around in a parking lot on your lunch break and find mushrooms. And so it's really accessible. And I think that kind of feeds into all, you can just sit down, you go on a hike with Alan Rockefeller, right? You don't go anywhere. And it's because you can suck down into this tiny space.
Yeah.
And I think that's a cool thing. Birding is great, but you got to go at a certain time of year, and you got to get your binoculars, and you got to get up early in the morning, and you're moving around, and it's just like, that's a lot of work, you guys. And if you want to have something that gets people fascinated with the natural world, something that pops up overnight that can be super brightly colored, you might be able to eat it, you might be able to use it for medicine. There's just like so many cool things about it. It's a really great teaching subject. And so I think that's kind of why
they're kind of like that ephemeral, thing that exists in nature. You never really know it's there or not. I think with birds, that they're going to be there. But again, you mentioned you have to have expensive binoculars. You have to have time. You have to have access. You have to have all these things to go find them. And I see mushrooms as this much more equitable way of getting into being a naturalist, because like you said, you can find them in the parking lot. You can find them in your local park. You don't need any special equipment beyond your eyes and your hands and maybe your nose and things to kind of start figuring out what this stuff is. And now we have tools, stuff like iNaturalist, that allows almost anybody to take a picture of a mushroom on their phone, upload it, and immediately start participating in phenology and citizen science. And I think that is so exciting to be part of that moment in history where we're seeing so many people kind of get clued into that. And I guess I'm curious, because you've had some experience building out lab spaces. You've had experience reaching out, particularly within communities like Oakland and, the Bay Area in general, but potentially serving underserved communities and helping bring science to people that haven't necessarily heard this stuff or had the benefit of going through, AP Bio and other things where this would have been sort of normalized. But I guess I'm curious if you have thoughts on sort of mushrooms and equitability of science education, and even sort of the involvement of citizen science and trying to get everybody involved in it, because we as a planet are facing this terrible, glooming threat of global warming, and it's going to affect all of us. It's not,
it's not global warming that's threatening us. It's not global warming at all. It's stupidity.
Yeah.
The big problem I see, like, we have a lot of gatekeepers in, academia and knowledge in general. Sometimes that's a paywall when you want to click and read on something. But sometimes that's just how many people between me and somebody who's a famous person in that field, right? Yeah. And in a lot of cases, I went to a lot of different schools, so I have this benefit of this great network and a lot of people that I can connect with. And I think that is really important in, making me feel like I can do it and I can be a part of it, right? Yeah. And I was really intrigued when I started on this mushroom thing, and, Alan's all over the place. And I sent him an email, and he was like, "Oh yeah, come on down, I'll show you how to sequence those things." Yeah. And I think the first time I ever met him, I made a collection of Gymnopolis thursii and Golden Gate Park, and then he was doing some expo at the community center there, and I brought it in, and he was like, "Oh, he found the only gymnopolis on the West Coast that's got psilocybin," and then everybody in the room was like, "Oh, whoa, good job, dude!" And I was like, "I literally just found these by the walkway on the way in," and so I think that like when and it's an interesting confluence of things, right? Because I would teach a lot of classes, and I would started teaching at counterculture labs, and it was like all white people, and then we would have all these conversations about how like we need to become more like welcoming, and how do we convince these people to come in this space? And I always felt like that was the wrong way to approach it. I was like, why do we have to make this space someplace they want to come? Why don't we go and like find people who want to partner with us, who already have made that space, and where they already feel like they own the space, and then they can tell us how we want, how we can actually do it. And I think that that is the more important piece of the puzzle, is like figuring out how to make sure that you as the educator are the one that's uncomfortable, not the person trying to learn.
Yeah.
And so, it's kind of uncomfortable for me to like go to like, churches in like, West Oakland and stuff and be like, hey, you've got a big event space, you have a constituency that maybe hasn't like ever had a chance to interact with this stuff. Maybe we can bring this to you.
Right.
And that way, it's only awkward for me, right? It's not like me trying to make a bunch of awkward choices about how I can make something less awkward for other people. It's about how can I like use the experience that I have and the real desire that I have to bring, accessibility to people, and just bring it to where they already are.
Yeah.
And then if they want to get more serious about it, they can go ahead and do that. And
but I'm sure when you did some of that stuff, one of the big things was that people who had never seen that stuff before were suddenly exposed to it. And whether or not they were immediately interested, and I have no doubt that people came and said, hey, I want to do your classes. I want to come to your spaces to learn more about this stuff or do it more.
Right.
You exposed a bunch of people who are now going out into the world, and they're able to tell their friends and family about like, oh yeah, not every mushroom is poisonous. You can touch them. Oh yeah, you can grow that. Oh yeah, I ate one of those oyster mushrooms. It was pretty good. I might try that instead of having some fried chicken if I'm watching my weight, kind of thing. I mean, you're doing so much more good by just exposing people to something like this that they don't have the contextual experience with. So I think
hopefully
that's really cool.
Linking them in with these mushroom communities, because I think the other thing is, not only if you want to learn the subject matter, but if you want to have fun with it, you got to have somebody else that's kind of in it with you.
Mm-hmm.
So finding other people that are jazzed about the same sort of stuff, and using, I mean, this is a secret for anything, right? It's like, if you want to make friends, like, go join the football team. I don't care if you don't like sports. Like, just do anything with another person,
Shared experience. That's how you do it.
Yeah, and it's like, like a lot of people will come and they'll be like, oh, you have all these different things that you've done, and you seem like you're good at it. Like, how do you do it? And it was like, I just found myself lost a lot in my life. And the way I always got myself out of that was, finding something that I have a true interest in, even if it's like, your options may be limited, but choose something that you do on some level have like a kernel of true interest and care for, and then like find a group of people that are into that stuff, and then find out how you can help someone there. And if you can do those three things, you will at least start yourself on a path. I mean, it's not like the be-all, end-all, this is exactly how you're going to solve all your problems. But I mean, if you're looking to join a group and feel like you're part of something and energize yourself using your biochemistry and your brain chemistry, like, this is what we're designed to do, right? We're supposed to like coalesce around things that we really truly believe together, and then like build amazing things. And so a lot of what I've tried to build with like Mycelial Mass and my MarioGabiati.com educational company is not really focusing on the what, but focusing on the process, and just finding as many things as we can that are like really engaging and fun and cool, and just like immediately, I want like a 4-year-old to see this thing, whatever it is, and just be like, "Ooh, whoa, what is that?"
Yeah. Well,
and
it helps when you have such vibrant examples of something like a glow-in-the-dark mushroom, or you have homemade oyster kits, or you have dye fabrics that have been dyed with things. It's really easy to engage people and get them to like come into a deeper level once you kind of hooked them.
Yeah,
And
I
I
mean, look
think,
at the variety. You got the mushroom kits right behind your mushroom posters right behind
yeah,
you.
it's
I mean,
visually
there's an
enticing.
amazing amount, and it's super regional. So everybody's going to have a little bit different, and it's a great opportunity to have a pen pal relationship if you want to have that,
Well, it's,
or if you want to get into arts and crafts, or if you want to do more scientific stuff.
yeah.
There's just always an avenue.
I've done it through social media, which has been interesting for me because I've built sort of I started, I guess, getting back into mushrooms when I was living in New Zealand. I didn't know anyone around me who was into it, but I was able to find accounts and people online who were talking about it and sharing information. And, again, I realized there's a level of regionality to it. And I was trying to ask people questions about mushrooms. They're like, I have no idea. You're in New Zealand. Like, I've never seen that before. But I got back and I was able to start finding pockets of communities all over the place. And one of the ones I ran into was reconnecting with you and finding that Mycelial Mass network that you'd created. And so do you want to talk a little bit about that as like a community organization, and maybe just a couple of the like types of classes and workshops that you guys have done?
Yeah. So the ultimate goal with Mycelial Mass is, opening up, like helping to support people that want to open up chapters in other areas, because the regionality is really important. And I, I've learned a lot of lessons kind of like founding this group. So Mycelial Mass is super loose. Originally, Seth Warner came up with the name when we were co-teaching at Counterculture Labs. And the idea was that it was going to be like a mushroom church kind of thing. And we would get together once a week and we would just kind of like vibe on liking these things. And, they were much more into the medicinal mushrooms end of it.
Yeah, there's a certain
But I
element of
really
that.
liked the idea that we would have, I think humans are ready to have something that's like church, but maybe not something that's so like bogged down in history and myth, and maybe something a little more bogged, like set in human ingenuity and grouping. I mean, like, if you're looking for a God, like look to the nearest person. Like, there's God and the devil is in each one of us, right? So I think we might miss the opportunity to see what's right in front of us if we're like thinking about the afterlife too much. But I think it really serves to bond people. And when you look at really tight bonds that people have in like, communities that are really religious, the bond part is really healthy. There might be other aspects of it that are bad, but the bonds that they are able to build over this shared interest in Jesus or whatever is really, I think, fundamentally human, and something that a lot of people in more secular communities are really looking for. And so if we can find ways to like bring that sense of spirituality to something that people that don't believe in, like, being gay is wrong, and, we want to kind of bring that careful desire to really build something special to whatever you already like. So Mycelial Mass is kind of trying to build that around mushrooms. We have 2 free classes every month, the last Sunday of the month and the last Tuesday of the month. The last Sunday of the month is at 10:30 a.m. and we usually do like a 3-hour kind of hands-on workshop. So this month we're doing mushroom dyes. Next, the month before we did a cooking workshop with Chad Hyatt, and we learned how to make mushroom leather, which was really cool.
Chad is excellent. He is definitely one of my favorite
great.
mushroom cooks. He's great. So, I guess if people are interested in just kind of keeping up with your events, they can check out your website, which is, just yourname.com. And then also, I think you guys have a Facebook group. Is that the other way?
Yes, we have Facebook groups. There's a MarioGabiati.com Facebook group. There's a Mycelial Mass Facebook group. If you guys are searching for it, you can just search Mycelial Mass. I think we're the only one that comes up.
But that's another way that you can build that communities. You have the people who come to the classes. You have the people. We used to have meetings. I'm not really having those. So I think you still do virtual meetings once in a while.
Yeah. So all of our meetings pretty much had to go online. For our workshops, we have a couple of teachers, co-teachers who come and do the workshops with us, and we like do it outside with masks.
Yeah. But now I can make it on a random,
Well, that's the point. That's, I really felt like this thing was very restrictive in that it was forcing us to do this online class. But I think after this pandemic is over, I'm going to keep doing the online class part, because it really has opened it up. I mean, we have like 5 or 6 students who routinely every month join us from Europe. That would have never happened before, and we would have had no indication that that was an interest that people had, and it cost us nothing to offer that. So it's great. It's people from all over the country and all over the world have joined our classes and are asking questions and showing us their home projects. That's the other thing. Now we've got a camera in everybody's home, and they can show us, hey, this is what I've been working on. This is the way that I solved this problem. That has been mind-blowing. You would be shocked what people are growing in their backyards, what they are like growing in their closets, and the like really ingenious ways that they've figured out how to get around certain problems. Because like we've got a whole lab set up here, so of course like I'm going to be nailing it. That's fine. But like when you don't have any of this and you live in like a 400 square foot apartment or something, like these people are coming up with some really fascinating stuff, and we get to see all that in class. And I love that. It makes me feel very bonded to the group. People that like find out that they're near, like we facilitate events that get them linked up, and we do strain exchanges so that people that are local can pick up. I mean, we only do the edible strains and medicinal strains here, but like, you know, hang around the group long enough, you'll find a way.
You'll meet people that'll have shared interests.
Yeah, so there's a lot of really like great community to be built here, and Mycelial Mass is just about trying to facilitate that and give as many people a platform as possible. So like Mayumi, who's coming to do the dyes this week, has her own company where she's selling these really beautiful floral and mushroom prints, and they're all natural dyes. And, you know, it's just so cool. Like, you know, how many times have you gone down to like Venice Beach and seen all the tie-dye with the pot leaves on it and stuff? She makes real silk scarves where she put the cannabis leaves on, and it makes this really beautiful, vibrant green color that stays on the fabric in the beautiful shape of the cannabis leaf. And
that's so cool.
You know, it's just so beautiful. You know, why were we ever trying to use the dyes, the unnatural dyes in the first place, right? The beautiful, the natural thing is so beautiful.
I remember you and I went to one of those sort of demo days where what's that incubator that I'm spacing on right now?
IndieBio.
IndieBio, yeah. So we went to IndieBio, and there was someone there who was coming up with a microbial way to make indigo dyes. Because if anyone doesn't know this, the dye that's used to dye your jeans, blue jeans, is really toxic. It's really bad for the environment, and especially in countries that make a lot of clothes, Southeast Asian countries without great access to, you know, equitability for sewer systems and stuff like that, that indigo dye gets into the water systems and can make people very sick. So there is a large social issue on like a world scale that could be solved by some more, you know, better sources of dyes. And I think looking at natural dyes, it sounds kind of hippie, but in some ways it makes a lot of sense. We have all of the components we need to dye clothing, make stuff look fantastic. And it's a really amazing process to get into it, learn the science, you learn the nature, you know, you're learning what's edible, what's not edible. There's so much that kind of goes along with it. And I think the other thing that I just love about all this mushroom stuff in general is that you don't need a formal background. I mean, you were mentioning Alan, and everyone doesn't know Alan Rockefeller. He is one of the most incredible mycologists of our generation. The two guys, you know, at the sort of at the next level above him would be like David Rohr and Paul Stamets, and neither of them had formal educations in mushrooms either. The people in this community are not the academics. It is not ruled by people in an ivory tower. It is, you know, populated by people who are just fascinated, interested nerds who decided to go out on hikes and start learning about stuff. And that's too what I like about your Mycelial Mass network platform, is that you're inviting people from all walks of life. Anyone can come in there. You don't need to have a background. You don't necessarily need to be knowledgeable. You will help teach people. And you know, that's the combination of having people get exposed on social media, get exposed through classes, get to workshops, you know, get involved with this stuff. I know people personally that you've inspired, and they've gone out and started businesses off of things that they learned from you in a class. I mean, that's, you know, I just think that's so great. So it's really inspiring to see all the things you're doing, and I just want people to know about, you know, some of the stuff that you have done. But without getting too caught up on all of that, you're sitting in a lab. You told me about the hood, but what else are you surrounded by? You gave me a quick glance. You want to show us what's going on in your lab here and kind of what your idea was with starting it?
So yeah, so originally before we did, let me make sure my camera's clean here. So originally before we had the shutdown, our whole plan was to have a lab that you could use, you know, like 6 or 8 other people would all have like memberships and you could come and do your own experiments here. So we have a couple of microscopes up this way. We've got kind of like racking. We're just kind of like holding all of our different cultures that we've got right now.
So
we're doing a lot of tests.
Yeah, hold one of those up. That's mycelium colonizing some grain.
Yeah, so this is corn. Yeah, this is Stropharia rugoso annulata on corn.
Nice. Okay, I got a bunch of that in my backyard, but you're growing it in more sterile conditions.
Well, what we're doing here is we're trying to. And so this is interesting. We got a little bit of contamination.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, not good.
No.
So we are using a bunch of different kinds of grains that we get from like animal feed because we're trying to give people the like best kinds or brands of like super cheap grains to use if you want to do your home project, because it sucks to buy like 50 pounds of grain and then realize that the amount of time you have to cook it in order to make it sterile is also the amount of time that it takes to cook it into a porridge with will never grow mushrooms, right? Yeah. So we have oats and wheat and corn, and we cook them at all different temperatures, and then we kind of like distill that down into like a set of guidelines that we offer.
So you guys are like America's home test kitchen, but for mushrooms.
A little bit, yeah. And then we have a kind of different library of strains, and so people will send us like spore prints, and they'll say, hey, can you like get this isolated and growing, and we'll do online tutorials. So also like a couple times a week I do private classes where people will sign in, and then we'll do like
you'll sort of
guided
consult with them and help them.
Yeah, and I'll either walk them through something they're doing at the time, or they'll watch me do it, and then we'll revisit week after week. We're in the process of building like a video library of different resources since we've been doing this for a while. So we're right about the point where we can like edit it up and make some pretty good videos that we can start offering as resources. But the other thing is I'm not trying to be the only one that is like doing the experimentation. So we have a couple of other students that also are invested in kind of this upkeep, and they will usually focus on fewer strains. So we have like 15 or so different strains of mushrooms that we're growing at any one time here. We also have like a little outside.
Cool. And so those are the strains that you guys are often using for classes where I've been over and helped you haul the big bales of straw out of the oil cans that you sort of sanitize them in, and then spread the straw out, spread your grain spawn all over it, and show people how to pack those into bags in sort of a sterile way that then people get to go home with a bag of soon to be myceliated straw or grain that fruits out mushrooms. So that's why you guys have all that.
So and we're still struggling to replace that experience. It was so.
Yeah, that's a tough one.
We're definitely.
Looks like Mario has cut out. Oh.
Oops. Oh no.
Okay, your connection's a little unstable, so you may want to head back in the house if things get too dicey. Oh, is this you got an outdoor greenhouse here? That's what.
Yeah. So I'll stand back
nice.
Where I get better. But so we have like reishi growing out there into a bunch of different shapes, and it's interesting to kind of see like what strains can we grow outside versus what strains really need to be heated, or what's the difference between full sunlight and using a blue LED. So we try to cover as much of that as we can while making it fun in class. So we don't really have any classes that are too serious. We try to keep it pretty fun. So every time in class, we usually for the Tuesday night classes, it's like Tuesday at 7. It's just a happy hour, so we like have some drinks and we share different like really cool pictures. And usually I'll have a student on who's like sent me videos the night before, and then they'll narrate the videos of like them going through like basically what I just did, but usually the service cuts out so that you try to get the videos beforehand. But it's amazing. I mean, like, Keys was on last month and showed us his whole garden, and he's got lion's mane like growing out of all these little holes that he built under these benches at his house.
Wow.
In like Berkeley. So I mean, it's really great. Yeah. All these different things that pop out, and it gives people a lot of inspiration to see other people doing it. And I
Yeah,
think that's really the
absolutely.
point. If you only think that, if you think you need a PhD in order to do this stuff, maybe you'll never do it. I mean, probably that's what distillers thought until shiners were like, no, buddy, you can do this in a bathtub. So, I
I mean, but
think,
that kind of thing is made possible by the fact that a lot of this knowledge becomes community based. And so it's
right.
not just book based, it's not just you have to have this textbook, you have to have this education. Having those things helps you learn quickly and assimilate information quickly, but there's nothing about what I've learned about mushrooms that was dependent on my background in academia. It allowed me to kind of supercharge myself. But again, I talked to Alan for 5 minutes and my head is like blown away. I cannot, the amount of information that some people can retain and absorb and really make into their own. They're teaching you, and I think that's an important point too, is that sometimes having to teach people really helps you learn something. And it was interesting again to hear you say that like your first sort of experience with mushrooms was having to teach it. And I think that fits with your personality very much because, I know you well enough to know that not everything you teach is something that you 100% understand or know, but you know it well enough to share it with others. And that's the important part, because you learn with them, and by teaching you learn a lot more than you would ever learn by sitting and poring over books for hours on end kind of thing. Quick note
Yeah.
though.
I mean, it's like the blind, the slightly less blind leading the
Yeah,
completely blind. I mean,
yeah.
I
Well,
think you can still offer a lot.
speaking of which, we are both a little blind because I think I offended a birder with our talk of birding being inaccessible. Birding is very accessible, so no worries on that. But someone says that mushrooms are more inaccessible than birds because birds are out there. So I don't know who to agree with, but
Yeah, I didn't mean to say anything about birding, but birding is definitely a lot harder than mushrooming. And I
I
think that
find that
was my
exact same.
only thing. I mean, it just takes a lot of effort. It's just like surfing is going to be more work than skateboarding. You just got to get out there. It doesn't mean that surfing's bad. It just means that surfing is going to be a little less accessible for people, and that's why there's more skateboarders in like Compton than there are surfers.
Yeah.
So it's, and that's, like surfing came from Hawaii, where the people who invented it probably weren't millionaires, but actually it was considered the like sport of kings. So I think the lens through which you look at stuff and, your proximity to certain things that are cheap for you to use are two things that really end up determining a lot about what you end up spending your life doing. So a lot of kind of I'm trying to think if there's been an academic pursuit in my life
Yeah.
that hasn't
Well,
seemed like it was mostly like
I mean,
like
one
people
of the
who
things
came from middle upper class backgrounds.
one of the things I know about you is that you're food motivated. And I think that was a thing where I
Yeah.
met you. I met you years and
Well,
years
that's
ago,
another
and
equalizer, right? Everybody loves food. And one of my
right,
favorite things is like, how can you hate a Mexican while you're eating tacos? And everybody loves barbecue. And so if
right,
you're always looking for a way, and it's the first way that a lot of cultures will invite you in as a way to like, you break
yeah,
bread, you share
experience
your
us through this. Yeah,
food. And it's a really great way. I think everybody can appreciate good food, whether you speak the language or whether you understand the culture. And I think that it can be a really great way to invite people in and make it accessible. I mean, it's something everybody's got to eat 3 times a day. My family's in the food business, but it's like, I mean, everybody has to eat every day, all day.
yeah,
And I feel really bad for the people that don't, who don't know how to cook and can't, don't take pleasure in nourishing themselves and like finding good foods, because whether you like it or not, you're spending all your time doing it, or like a good chunk
yeah.
of your
We
time doing it.
we do, and I think mushrooms are a great way to get people. Again, I came at mushrooms from a food angle. I was very interested in what can I eat. And it wasn't until later that I realized how much, more diversity and other things there were, but it was certainly a hook in for me. And it was a really great way to start exploring them because
You got to
not only
manage your
give you, yeah,
disappointment when you don't get the edibles you were looking for.
that's true,
I
but
mean,
it
that's
wasn't,
kind of,
yeah,
I came at it from a food angle too, really, from the mushroom standpoint. And I've still got this fantasy of like finding a big, porcini patch for my dad, which will like apparently never happen. But I think that, your food choices and the way that we like invite people in with this is a really important way to like connect And mushrooms make it really easy because there's something that are, it's like the same cooking principle applies to almost any mushroom.
Pretty much.
And there's some weird ones, but there's a lot of diversity and they're good for you. Although something I thought was really interesting from what's the famous guy that does mushrooms demystified, David Aurora. And he's like, when you really break it down, the most healthy thing about mushrooms is walking around looking for them. There's a lot of things that I think we're discovering with, these different chemicals. And I think that having like a good varied diet, I think in general helps your body. I don't know if mushrooms necessarily have to be part of it. And I think
I don't think they have to be, but I do think there is some pretty good evidence out there that like the complex polysaccharides and stuff in there are definitely feeding good populations of bacteria. And so it's not an easy answer to say, I don't want to just say they're a superfood, but like literally they'd be helping your body overcome inflammation and allergies and potentially other things by eating lots of them. And certainly as like a sustainable protein source, they're one of the best things out there that we can do for like the trade-off of the energy and the resources you put into the amount of protein you get out. I mean, I just like the thing that always sticks in my head is beef is something like 1,600 gallons of water per pound of beef, and then you can get like a pound of mushrooms for about 12 gallons of water, which is, and you don't have to take up any arable land, you don't have to do anything. It's just like grow mushrooms on a little thing and they'll sprout out. And you mentioned, having people who come up with their own cultivation projects. And I think when you talk about mushroom cultivation, people say, well, I don't know, isn't a mushroom kit $30? And you're like, yeah, it is to get started. But if you get hooked in with your class and you learn how to start propagating these things, maybe you start keeping your own cultures or growing your own grain spawn, this becomes very cheap very quickly, especially if you have access to agricultural waste or, wood, anything like that.
Yeah, well, we offer a kit on our website that you can get, and it comes with like a little incubation chamber, and so all the things so that you can be successful at first. There's a lot of places where you can just buy the mushroom spawn block, and then hopefully it like fruits a couple times on your counter. But the idea with our kits is that once you get the kit, you can keep using that and then use the group to keep getting spawn or, figure out how to grow your own. And especially with oyster mushrooms, it's really easy. And I think that's the other thing, because I teach some mushroom cultivation and stuff for Culinary Academy up in St. Helena. And those chefs are doing this farm to table program where 90% of them are going to move to New York City or something and not have access to a table, let alone a farm. So I think they learn some concepts in the mushroom section of the class that's going to help them, because we also do like koji fermentation and making kimchi and stuff like that. And so that has this like really powerful ability to give you a chance to participate in this farm to table ethos, even though you may only have a cupboard or a shelf to grow some stuff on. And I can't believe how much kimchi I'm going through now, because I'm like making all my own food, and I used to buy it at like Costco and those big explodey things, but once you start making it yourself, it tastes so much better. And I got this like 2-gallon crock, but it's amazing. I mean, like it has this great regulatory, it's like a good mix of acids and all these different things that your gut microbiota really like. And it has this regulatory effect. And like, that's the same thing. I was just having this conversation the other day with a neighbor who was complimenting me on these like garden beds that I have out in the front of my house.
Your garden beds are looking
And we're
good.
getting some like really impressive growth. I've got this like tree tomato, and everyone's like, I've never seen a tree tomato like keep that many leaves. And I'm like, me neither. But we've been sticking all of our spent mushroom blocks from these classes in those beds for like an entire year. And my soil never gets unbalanced. Every time I add like a ton of compost, it smells for like until I water it. And then it's like the enzymes start, like all that soluble material gets bound up in the soil right away. It's not burning the plants. There's a ton of nitrogen all packed in there. And a lot of that is those mushroom enzymes, and that fungal or the bacterial fermentation is just packing it with these weak acids and bases and all of these enzymes that create, just are slicing up everything that's going through that bed on a molecular level and making everything very bioavailable for the plants. And the plants just love it because they've got on-demand nutrients, and they're never strong enough to burn them. So even on a hot day when it's like over 100 degrees, they're not burning at the leaf tips because they can just take up the water. They don't also have to take up the salts at the same time, which if you're ever doing any like broadcast fertilization with your commercial fertilizers, you're adding a lot of salt, and your plants don't have as much control over the uptake of those nutrients as they do when they're, in precipitate, and they have to release like a carbonic acid or something to get those ions. So having like that mushroom material in there, I think, is a big part, because every time you add compost, you're adding a ton of bacteria. So that's not really a problem. And sometimes you can get like sour smells and like too much pH shift out of having like really heavily amended beds. But we can add a lot of organic material to our beds because this mushroom stuff seems to eat it up. And it was kind of a side effect. I was just using it as a place to put the material. But the results are really great. Yeah. And I think that kind of plays into this whole thing. I've been teaching people this for a few years, but I never really had an opportunity to like really play it out. Yeah. And it just is making a lot of sense. And we've had farms that we've consulted with where we've done this, and they've had similar results. But we kind of like don't dig or till our beds. I think a lot of these concepts have a much harder time when you try to scale them up to a commercial scale. Because I think a lot of the benefits come from not messing with the substrate too much, and if you're on a farm and you're moving all this dirt, I think to some extent you're really depressing that fungal activity to, only the very basic levels when it's like starting to grow. But, every time you go to a forest environment, I think I was watching your interview with Damon, and some things were like tingling my, he's like, he loves walking around the forest and imagining these like giant fungal networks that are all around us.
Everything in the soil and the nutrients constantly shuttling back and forth. One thing too is thinking about trees versus, mycelium, and like, it's not always a one-way flow. There's a lot of movement of things back and forth depending on the season and like what the environmental conditions are. And yeah, walking out and stepping on the ground, like, oh my God, how many things are moving back and forth?
How amazing and inspiring is that for you to feel when you go walking through the forest? And I think a lot of people just wander through the forest and they're like, there's some green shit and it's not too hot. That's kind of nice, And I think that like every little bit of knowledge that you get and you apply to what's around you, all of a sudden, like, it just opens your eyes to all this amazing stuff that's happening. And, if you were to know like every piece of data that was happening around you all the time, you would be in a state of like ecstatic, wonder every moment, and you'd never be able to function. So I don't want to know everything, but every little bit I know about like the biological world is like fucking reading another chapter in like Frodo's Magic Kingdom. And to know that it's real and it's right under our feet, and like learning to differentiate what different plants are there and what different fungus are there and why they're there and what it tells you about the environment, it's like this mind-blowing, ability that just, it's like getting new eyes. All of a sudden, instead of seeing like a green blob, you're seeing like 15 different plants. And oh my God, can I tell you a story about all these plants? And, so at some level, it's not a chore to start learning this stuff. I think it's really hard to get your basic framework together. And, once you've been in school for 15 years, totally fascinated by biology, you've got a great tree, and then you can just hang new pieces of information on it very easily. I think when you're coming from a background where you don't get any of that, it can be really hard to hang those pieces of information anywhere, and that becomes very overwhelming very quickly. But it's pretty easy to build on someone who just wants to do something because they like it. Right. And I think there was a post we did on Mycelial Mass that showed these just drawings, like biological drawings that some people have done, and they're like totally beautiful. You can't explain science or teach science without infographics and artist renderings of things. Yeah. That stuff is so important. And if you think about like trying to be a chemist and you want to change, you have to imagine. You can't see molecules, you can't see a reaction, you don't know what the hell's going on in there. You have to like study all this stuff and then like use your imagination, and this stuff happens, and then like you're a genius. So this idea that art isn't important and like science is more important, I'm like, the two are inextricably linked. And the best art, the best scientists are also artists. So like we do a bioembroidery program with Laura Tandeschi, and she is like an award-winning fiber artist who's been doing these beautiful pieces of art for 35 years, and she's won all these awards all around the state, but she's also a protein purification specialist at Novartis, and she's been working there for 20 years. And she, for like 2 weeks during the beginning of this coronavirus, her lab was the one that was like growing the protein that they sent off to make all the vaccines with.
Oh, wow.
So like the entire world was holding their breath while she was trying to isolate and produce this protein. And then when she nailed it, she made enough. I mean, you can make a whole lot real fast once you get the protein down. And then she was like, oh, now I can relax. But there was like 2 weeks where she was like, I can't do class. And, you know, to have somebody that can not only, you know, show you, hey, you can be a really accomplished, amazing scientist and who's a genius level scientist and be an artist, I think is really important on the one hand. But also, you know, there's a, you know, that second thing about the religious aspects of stuff is they have a lot of ritual, they have a lot of repetition. And if you want to memorize something, if you want to be the guy that knows all your like chemistry nomenclature, like come embroider it in one of our classes. Like I guarantee you'll never forget it.
Yeah.
And that repetition
learning
and that
to teach others and giving people those unsolicited mushroom and plant facts is how you you spit it out. You're going to tell people it'll repeat. It'll stick there.
But also finding new ways to do it, because you can get pretty used to repeating yourself, you know.
You can.
And so teaching a class, and I'm like totally not nervous and I know everything I'm going to say. I really try to start training a student to take over a little bit, because I know that, you know, like I'm only going to get better if I'm kind of a little nervous that I'm maybe.
Gotcha. Yeah. If it becomes too routine, you might tune out and not give your best. So you have to.
Well, and I think that's what happens to a lot of academicians, because they start saying stuff and they're not checking their math anymore, and stuff is changing all the time.
It really
is. So stuff that we just learned a few years, 5-10 years ago is already different. And I think to some extent we've internalized that because stuff has changed, at least in like mycology, so fast.
Oh, yeah.
But in a lot of sciences, I think, you know, at some point you just feel like you've been at the top of your game for a long time. What do I got to do any reading? And I think that that's the same problem. You know, that's why upstart lawyers can upset the, you know, lawyer that's been there forever. He didn't do as much legwork as you do. So there's a lot, I think for that reason, there's a lot of opportunity for people that don't come from like normal academic backgrounds to make a lot of great impacts on science these days. And that's like a big focus of what we're trying to do with like Mycelial Mass, and like when you contract with my company to come into your school or your workplace, we're really like working to identify like, hey, how can we find interests that already exists here and use them to link people together so that they can be stronger networks and they can produce stuff that's better. And I think once you have a little group of people around you that can support you, I mean, look at Open Insulin, right? A lot of those people come from backgrounds that either they don't have degrees or they're still working on their masters or something, and they're working on stuff that's in the mainstream news and is having a big impact on some of our like medical science stuff. So, you know, we live in this age where you can publish your stuff a little bit better and you have a little bit better access to equipment and information. You also have to be better at parsing through what is good information and what is bad information.
That is
so that's a really important part of your education. And I think training people to be really curious so that they really want to know the answer. They don't just want to answer this particular thing. They want to know because they want to see how it fits on that intellectual tree they've got.
It's not the
that's
right answer.
That's going to identify for you what works. And and I think a lot of the charlatans kind of expose themselves because they haven't been working to put it in that larger framework where everything fits together in this beautiful pattern, because they're only trying to go for this one narrow focus, you know. And it's like, well, if you back up and you look at it from a bigger angle, you can see that there's a lot more opportunities. But I think regardless of that, everybody needs a network, and it's really easy to get discouraged, and it's really easy to think that you're stupid and that you shouldn't fight for something you believe in, or, you know, you're not good enough to get that job. And I think that that's total BS, and that the more I can give you an opportunity to like sit next to somebody that you vibe with and want to like, you know, just like hang out and shoot this stuff with, and then, oh, by the way, they're this like inspirational person that now all of a sudden you don't feel is so different from you. Like those are the kinds of things that might inspire the next Nobel Prize winner or something.
I really, yeah, I agree with you. I think that the boundaries of science are going to be pushed a lot by citizens and people who are not necessarily coming down this academic track, especially as academia loses more and more funding. We have less access and equitability across science in general than for a lot of time in history because of differences in people being able to come into the country and stuff like that. I think pushing ahead and like the sentiments you shared are so powerful and so incredible, and it's really cool that you're out here doing that. But there's
creating
lots
a
of other,
pipeline from someone just
pipeline.
being curious all the way to like actually having a good high-paying job.
Yeah.
We've got everything from like, hey, just come out to our free classes, to hey, you can do your own experiment, to hey, you can join this lab, to hey, we'll put you in this incubator lab. We're opening up an incubator lab for microbiology at Circuit Launch right now. We're talking with Cell Valley Labs to help with some of their projects. So we've got like a really good pipeline that we've built right now.
That's
and
awesome.
we're just inviting people to like come and get curious and play. And if you want to take it further, we've got all the tools for you. If you just want to hang out and like have fun, then that's also cool. And I think that that's all part of the thing that makes this special and fun. And it's great.
It is pretty incredible. So we're almost out of time, but I want to ask you one thing before you go, because I know it's really cool. You mentioned koji, and koji is basically aspergillus. It's a mold that grows through stuff. It's what makes miso and soy sauce, and is responsible for transformations and fermentations of various foods. And this is getting at the idea of something I've realized fairly recently, which is what I'm going to call trophic transformation. And fungi are really good at this. Normally, when we go up in levels of trophism, which means like, an algae gets eaten by a fish, gets eaten by a tuna, gets eaten by a shark, you lose a lot of efficiency between each level. And that's part of why beef is so expensive environmentally, because we're losing so much efficiency. What's really cool about fungi is fungi have this capacity to kind of move sideways, and they can trophically transform stuff to make the nutrients more bioavailable, and take something that is a low value product like rice or corn or whatever, and make it into something that is a far more valuable food source, heavy in protein. And you can even do this with meat too, in that Mario has made koji salami and all sorts of different koji fermented foods. Do you want to, in like a minute, tell me some about the work you've done with koji and kind of how cool that's been to see the trophic transformation with this mold?
Yeah, koji is amazing. I mean, I think koji is just kind of the best example of what all fungus do.
Yeah.
And it won't, it can't create protein where there was no protein. All it is like a really intense set of scissors. And usually any fungus will create a mix of like amylases and proteases and stuff that will transform all this stuff. But basically they're just taking big molecules and they're making them smaller and smaller. And as you cut up proteins, you get amino acids. They're more volatile. They create aromas and different flavors. As you cut up starches, you're creating sugars and different things that, and like, and to some extent, that's what's happening with bacterial fermentation too, which is why you get a lot of like flavor that develops out of like your fermented hot sauce versus you're just like making a chili sauce, or like fermenting a kimchi or a sauerkraut versus just cooking your cabbage. So I think that mushrooms are just so good at it because they don't also have the opportunity to be photosynthetic, or and they're kind of in this very special part of the environment where they're occupying, right in between the spaces that all the other stuff. And they're very efficient because they don't really move. They're not motile as much, so they don't like go. So, I think that koji is amazing because it makes those enzymes that are so powerful so accessible, so that you can just start using them in your cooking. And this is stuff, I mean, you can just get the liquid, the rice, and shake it up with a liquid and use it to marinate meats, and it turns them into something amazing. And I think that's a great way for people to start with koji if they want, because those marinades are super easy and they work really well. And once you get excited about that, and they work really well with seafoods, just marinate your seafood in this koji, shio koji, it works great. And then once you're more curious, come to some of our classes and we'll teach you how to get even more crazy with it.
That sounds great. Well, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate the time, Mario. It's been awesome.
It was a lot of fun. It went fast.
Yeah, I know. I told you it always does. So.
And I think once you post this, we'll put in the comments the links.
Yeah, Mario will get all the stuff in there. But I got to run, so it's been good, man. Take it easy. Good luck.
Thanks.
Thank you again.